Welcome to episode 37 of the Creative Train podcast. I'm going to talk about a few things in this episode. How to write a script for a monologue podcast versus how to write a script for having a guest on your podcast. And as with all things here on the Creative Train podcast, these are just my own experience and workflow. Your mileage may and probably will vary. But I was asked recently, how do I write my intro and outro and body script for my solo podcasts? So that's what this episode is all about. Let's get organized. All aboard? I find myself a few times every day reaching for my phone, either to dictate or to type in ideas for podcast ideas. And I have a folder in my notes section called CTPC, Creative Train Podcast, Ideas. And in there, I jot down my ideas either in a few words or a few paragraphs or even just a few bullet points. All of these things are inspired by real life experiences. Maybe something will happen in a class with a student and I'll just suddenly turn around and write down the idea so I don't forget it. But they're all real life experiences from me making a living in the arts for the last 30 years with everything from music lessons to now creativity coaching, to just random thoughts that go through this artist's mind when planning a project, working on a project, dealing with a recalcitrant student or even an exceptional student. Or sometimes it's just my own struggles with making sure that I'm honest and genuine with every single person who has come to me for guidance, regardless of their own experience or level of accomplishment or expertise. I often prefer to put pencil to paper, but too often the erasing or crossing out words or phrases that repeat too much or aren't yet pertinent to the conversation ends up being no more than a distraction. So when I type on the computer, even though I'm not a great typist, the brief pauses that I have to reread and reflect on not only my grammar, but my verbiage gives me a little window of clarity that most times lets me recollect myself after a few seconds to proceed with a train of usually more cohesive thoughts. Sometimes I just type furiously as fast as my hunt and poke method of entering the letters will allow, and then I go back and edit the typos and flow later. Even as I sit here tonight, June 14th, 2025, I've gone back at least a dozen times to correct typing errors to this point in the script. We're 3 minutes and 15 seconds in. My best suggestion is for you to feel how your ideas are flowing and just make sure that you get the truly salient points down. Forget about all the things like typos unless you're sure they won't trip you up during your narration. Also, try your best to keep it conversational and not like something you know somebody will be reading, meaning don't let your vocabulary override your message. Those flowery words don't really have much place in normal conversation, unless, of course, you're that guy. And you end up overdoing it to try and impress your audience with things they really never hear in regular conversation, unless, of course, you're talking to Jordan Peterson. If you take some time to compose your thoughts, you're more likely to come across as listenable and likable. If you deliver a sermon or sound like you're narrating, you'll probably lose your listeners pretty quickly. I've taken a few really good prompts from some of my favorite podcasters and radio interviewers about what I like and dislike about their delivery. And that has led me to the approach that I'm describing right now. There's one guy in particular, he's a radio interviewer, and he interviews artists and folks like that. And I know that he's very good. I've often thought I'd like to get to know myself better by being on his show because he brings out such honest revelations in his guests. But when he's talking to people, he's constantly stumbling. Like every sentence starts off with like, I know that, like, or like, maybe you could talk about, and it's not a stutter that he has, but it's just like every sentence starts off that way. It gets really irritating. So I tend to just kind of like tune him out a little bit when he's talking and listen to the guest instead. So, and this is what can happen if you go totally off the cuff with your podcast and you occasionally refer to your notes when your thought train comes back to the siding. People will notice. We tend to drift off topic and repeat ourselves when our moment in the spotlight draws on. It's like we're circling back to the original point, somewhat unsure if we've already addressed that point or how we've addressed it. And we're passionate and determined about these things, that we love to talk about these things. But if the same points keep coming up just under different verbiage, people will pick that up and will start to tune you out or even off. You might not even be aware of it when you're speaking, but you will always hear it in the conversation with others when they're speaking, and they'll pick it up in your delivery. So don't do that. Don't be so disorganized that you can't keep track of what you're talking about. Instead, you could write things out in bullet points and then start to connect the dots with a vibrant and engaging descriptions of your experience. Doing things like deliver a point of thought, then offer a brief story of your own experience with that same point. And don't make it the all about me show. Keep it flowing and keep it relevant. Your listeners want to be able to relate to you, and you want them to hear not just your words, but to understand, process, and assimilate your experience to form their own thoughts, approaches, and methods. We are all standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. So this is your chance to help your listeners find a new, exciting, and engaging vista. In my voice acting career to date, I've narrated audiobooks, created radio ads and social media ad campaigns. And the first few were almost paralyzing because I was trying to guess how I should sound. And I never let my instinct take over and guide my process. But when I finally learned to trust myself more, then my clients were much more readily pleased with my work and less likely to comment on the narration style or voice tone. By this, I mean, I brought something to the proverbial table which was either not heard or expected. I brought a genuine human with inflections, tone, pace, and a believable delivery to the moment. I'm pretty confident that AI won't really totally replace that human touch. There are those that don't care if their ads are narrated or scripted by AI. They don't really care. They just want their narration or scripting done for free. But people usually see and hear through that. So try not to be that guy. And believe it or not, your hand and facial gestures come across in just your voice. When delivering a point which is somewhat dubious, squint your eye, tilt your head to one side, then the other side. Scrunch your nose up a little bit. People get it. There is something about this that comes across to your listeners. So when you're talking about something exciting and profound, smile and use your hands. The microphone can't possibly record this gesture, but your listeners will definitely pick up on your vibe. And as you may know about me, I'm all about the vibe. Even as I'm typing this particular script, the writer in me is typing phrases like I am or we are, but I go back to change them to their abbreviations of I'm and we're, since that's how we speak. And a podcast should be like hearing a really cool one-sided conversation. Not a sermon and not a speech. It's entertainment, educational entertainment. Edutainment? Edutainment. I like that. Even when I miss changing those phrases in the typing, in the moment of narration, I'll usually autocorrect those things to conversation mode speech rather than dictation mode reading. On the tech side of things, I use two large computers in my recording studio. The one in front of me is a 36-inch screen, and it will display my audio recording workstation so I can see the waveforms and if I'm peaking out or anything like that. And I watch that while I'm recording occasionally. To my left is a 32-inch display where I have my script in big, easy-to-read 15-point text, which I can scroll as I read. I could get into more technical points, but I should probably do that in another episode if anyone wants to hear about that. But I'm pretty sure that stuff is just a simple Google search away for most folks. When I'm both engineer and talent, I need, or I really want to keep my eyes and ears engaged in the entire process. And it's tough trying to switch gears back and forth sometimes. If you're reading and recording your script, just go with the flow unless you really F something up. Otherwise, if you stumble over words or sentences, just take a breath, wait a second, open your mouth a bit, and then resume from where you left off. Let it record all of this stuff. You can edit that out later. And I say to wait a second or two for a couple of big reasons. One is so that you have a moment to center yourself, but also any mouth noise into the mic will be avoided. And that is a solid tip. Aren't you glad you came out today? Nobody wants to hear mouth noise, and I'm sorry for leaving that one in, but I wanted you to know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like being right inside somebody's mouth. It's gross. And this approach saves a ton of time if you're trying to do things in the moment, because guaranteed you'll lose your flow if you have to switch modes back and forth constantly between narrating and editing. So listen back really closely, spend extra time with good, clean edits. Leave your microphone settings exactly the same way. Don't ever touch them during the recording process. Do the talking part when you're in podcaster mode, and the editing part when you can be in technician mode. I'm not going to get too technical, like technology-wise, but to sum things up in a few sentences now, things you got to remember when you're scripting. Always be genuine. Write and compose your podcast scripts as if you have the wonderful opportunity to speak directly to just one person who really, really wants to hear what you have to say. Because that's exactly what you're facing. Imagine that one special person will hear your words. Your input has been requested, and you've been given some time to offer your thoughts and wisdom to that person. Collect yourself, get to the point, and don't waste your listeners' time. The next point, how do you prepare for having a guest on your podcast? If you've seen any interviews or stuff like that on YouTube, you'll notice the host person almost always has an iPad or something with notes. And if they don't have such a thing, you can be pretty sure there is a monitor out of sight of the camera with prompts on it. And this is typically your research notes on your guest or guests' career to date, or things like their social media presence, their recent works, their projects. They're more like talking points rather than a script. The whole point of a conversation is a back and forth flow of ideas, observations, comments, and retorts. And your foremost responsibility to your guest and listeners is to allow that flow to happen. When I have guests on, I always ask them well in advance of the recording if there are any things they wish to not be brought up in the discussion. And I do this out of respect because I know that they may have very different ideas than I do on politics and stuff. So I make every effort to avoid those things unless the guest brings it up. An interesting point, one guest I had on, Danielle Moisa, great artist. You got to check that one out if you haven't checked it out. It's a 2-part interview. But I had a whole list of ideas of things to talk about. And I think in just the first maybe 5 minutes of Daniel's speaking, he addressed every single one of those points without a single prompt for me. And I think it's because when you're vibing with someone, if you know what I mean, you know what they're about, you know what they do. The things that I found I would want to discuss with him, he just naturally brought up in conversation. And so we're like, 5, maybe 10 minutes into the conversation, and all of my talking points had already been addressed. And I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And that episode, Daniel and I talked for just under 3 hours, and I edited it all down to 2 1-hour episodes. So it's a good listen if you want to go back to that. He's certainly a guy that you can learn a lot of things from. Because I've been told I have some controversial notions and stuff, I tend to avoid those things like politics. But my responsibility as an artist and a podcaster is to not let my opinions obscure the message I want to get out there. The Creative Train podcast is all about empowering artists, educators, and creators. Those off-topic discussions are for a very different playlist, which is on my YouTube channel, which you can find by looking for Resound 7, RESOUND, and the number 7, and looking for the personal vlog or Visions webcast playlists. So do your research. If you don't know your guest personally, find links, go way back and ask them about their time on MySpace. Ask them about their early motivations, what got them to where they are now. Reference some social media stuff. Show them that you're not only interested in their thoughts on the topic du jour, but also them as a person, as a thinker, as a doer, in whatever capacity finds them as your guest. It's not really a matter of having a great big list of questions to ask, so much as bringing up those points of discussion and allowing your guests the time and freedom to talk. Your position in this is not to override their space by interjecting your own stories all the time, but rather more like guiding the conversation by connecting those important points of the conversation and creating a flow or discourse that feels like conversation and not an interview. There was one particular person I reached out to have as a guest here, and they actually declined the opportunity because they said they didn't feel comfortable in interview situations. And I did my best to try and describe the difference between me interviewing them and us discussing things, but they still decided they didn't want to discuss anything either, despite the fact that I thought they would have been an ideal guest for this podcast theme. And another thing is, don't ever try to trap someone in controversy. Don't throw shade on something they said or did, or bring up controversial things that have not been specifically prompted that you might ask about. If the conversation starts to drift off in the direction or you might be addressing something you know this person did or has been known to do, pause a second and ask them, can you or do you want to talk about such and such a thing? And if they have the slightest sign of not wanting to go there, then don't. You don't want to shut your guest off. Always remember why you wanted to start doing this podcast thing. Do you have a mission or just a message? Do you have a few ideas you want to get out there? Are you in this for the long haul, or do you want to just see how it feels to try it out? And my best suggestion is to have a very clear goal or vibe or aura or whatever intention around your podcast. What are you hoping to accomplish by getting your thoughts and your ideas and your words out there? If it's something career-oriented, then start keeping very neat and orderly notes on ideas for podcast episodes. If it's an opinion-based podcast and you just want to go talk about the topics of the day, then make sure you are very well informed before you start publishing things you may come to regret saying. Always be super disciplined when it comes to getting organized for scripting and presentation, but still allow yourself to go with the flow when the flow demands so. Don't sound like you're narrating. Use your hands, use your facial expressions, and you'll come across as a lot more believable. Any questions? Hit me up. You can drop a comment here on the podcast page or on my Creative Train YouTube playlist, which is at the aforementioned Resound 7 page, my own business page, or on the Creative Train Facebook page, or at creativetrain.ca. There's your pep talk. Now go get to work. Well, I hope you found that helpful, how to get organized. As I said off the top, this is just my own experience. I've done now 37 episodes on being creative, how to be organized, how to teach, how to keep the muse around you, how to encourage the flow. And after I did the first maybe 10 episodes, I was starting to wonder what I was going to keep talking about. But things happen day to day, new interactions with new students, new clients, old students and old clients. And it all starts to become something where I think these points are things that you should know about based on what I've experienced. Your mileage may vary, but go get to work.